First, I want to thank Mark Scala and the Frist Center. It's really an honor. I never thought I'd get to exhibit this soon in my career at the Frist Center, and it really means a lot as a local artist that an institution of this caliber supports local artists. I'm going to kind of run through, I guess, since I'm relatively new to this community, we're going to kind of run through how my art's developed from undergrad to where it is presently. But I'm not going to kind of talk through every slide. Just give you a sense of visually how this has evolved, and also to point out a few of the themes that's gradually kind of emerged in the work. I started off really interested in when I guess first started getting really interested in painting with I was really interested in the human form, and gradually the human form and the landscape, and then finally just the landscape, and then it gradually got more and more abstract. I tell my students, if I'd seen the work that I'm making now when I was 20, I would have quit making art, because I absolutely loathe the kind of art that I now make. But I think that happened because, not so much intentionally, but just because I think I was kind of open to where art could take me. And I think the first big influence I had was when I went to the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and I saw what I used to think was really boring in art history class. I saw his work, and I was really interested in the layers of paint and the translucency of it, and that's when I really, I think, fell in love with painting. And so that's how this is pieces right after I came back from Europe. And I remember the other thing that got me excited about art was when I really discovered that art wasn't about just the optical, but it could really engage all sorts of things that that were significant to existence. And so this is grad school, and this is about a 8-foot long painting, lots and lots of glares until it became almost grotesque. And it was in grad school that I became really frustrated, and because my work wasn't going where I wanted it to. And I remember one night I stayed up really late one night in the studio, and I was painting, and this piece I'd working on for like 2 months, it was going terribly, so I just bought a random orbit sander, and I started sanding it to get rid of it. I was going to start completely over, and that's when I realized, wow, this is something really interesting is happening. And I think that was a breakthrough, mainly because I started seeing the process as really a huge asset, in that the process could take me places that I couldn't imagine, that I didn't have to know where the work is going. I could just wrestle with this materials, these processes, the surface, and through that struggle, something much more interesting than my conscious, mind or willful self could come up with. But I continued with lots of glazes, lots of surfaces, building it up, sanding back down, and kind of discovering, things that were, below the surface, and create relationship, and find relationships that were more interesting than something I could have come up with on my own, in my own brain. When I got out of grad school, I really, I got a job in a cubicle. I didn't have any time to make art as much as I wanted to. My job was really easy for a while, so I started making art with office supplies. These are like 3 or 4 inches wide, and I continued to keep my mind and my hands busy with making art, which is, I don't know. I think it would have been difficult to continue making art had I not done the office supply art. After a while, I actually kind of felt guilty because I was stealing so much office supplies, so I started bringing my own office. I reimbursed them, and no one found out about it, but I reimbursed them with my own office supplies and kept making it. Also, once I started teaching, I continued to experiment. This is with glass. And I started to spend a lot more time, sanding and glazing over and over and over again. This is, and I also, for a while, my work included embedded metal, inlaid metal. And I was always kind of looking for things other things I could add to my process, and I started cutting really thin lines in the work. But again, I continue to see these as landscapes, even though they're not explicitly so. And gradually, I started scraping the paint on, and this is at a point where I really stopped thinking. My early work, I was really consciously thinking about things like aesthetics and philosophy, and trying to have all those things inform my work. But I finally kind of let go of that, and really started just thinking about materials and process, and thinking about it that way. And they would almost always kind of, be informed deep down from all the reading that I'd done and those points of views. But I think it became a lot more organic how the work started to evolve. This is done. Jacques Derrida had died. He was like my favorite philosopher. And it was during this time, around this time, that I started listening to a lot of Philip Glass's music. I would listen to his work, and it started to really heavily influence my work. And I'll talk more about him in just a moment. And as you can see, this is the paint that's been sanded over and over again. It starts off incredibly rough, gets smoother and smoother, and I spend probably 80% of my time sanding with 500 grit sandpaper on a random orbit sander. And these last pieces are kind of a lot closer to what is here at the Frist. And my work is, as I was saying earlier, my work is heavily influenced by the work of Philip Glass. I really like Glass because of his repetitive structures. As Chia Wing Wu states, much of his early work was based on the extended reiteration of brief, elegant, melodic fragments that wove in and out of an oral tapestry. Or to put it another way, it immersed the listener in a sort of sonic weather that twists, turns, surrounds, and develops. Wu goes on to speak of his obstinate repetitions. Obstinate in the way they are stoic individually, these individual segments of the music, but work together to make something that is altogether not stoic, that together create tension between the whole and the parts. But this tension isn't created just, it isn't just contained formally from within. In my work, it doesn't create rhythm by exclusive formal repetition. And in that sense, I really think my work rejects modern abstraction. I don't think of these works as objects in and of themselves. They do point to other things outside of themselves. In this way, they're multi-layered text, textures that accumulate outside associations alongside interior and exterior sensations that mediate one's experience for the viewer. Jacques Derrida said, "There's nothing beyond the text." And I think this is true in art with the visual language we use. John spoke in John 1:1, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh." Or as I like to say, "In the beginning was the text, and the text became textile or messy, and interwove itself into the world of things and flesh." In other words, the work works by not just internal operations, but also to its external associations. It is not beyond the text. So that it creates rhythm not just through formal repetition, but through simultaneous representation, avoiding any exclusive association or singular interpretation that would oversimplify the complexity of our experience. One of the things that I try to do is I try to eliminate, when I'm working on these pieces, if it starts to look too much like one thing, then I start pulling it back in a different direction, because I want there to be I want it to be indeterminate what the references are. So you might start thinking of carbon fiber or plowed fields or window blinds or clouds, and all of these metaphors or these associations or these analogies help to create, or is my way of attempting to create a semblance of the way I see and experience and think about the landscape that I experience, because I don't see a landscape in and of itself. I can't see in a godlike way what the land looks like. I don't know what the land looks like, capital T truth, because of my unique history, because of the history that I've inherited, because of the religion that I partake in, because of the philosophy that I subscribe to, because of the family that I grew up in, because of the literature that I've read, and my own psychology. In other words, I see the land differently probably than you do, and I definitely see it's very different from someone from Africa or Pakistan or whatever, wherever. Thank you.
I'm going to get this clock going because I will yap for an hour if I don't. So there we go. Start. Okay. I want to say some of the things that Warren said. I want to thank everybody for being here. It's a nice crowd. I didn't realize this many people were here until I got up here, but thanks everyone for coming out. I've got family and friends here and colleagues, and really appreciate that. And I'd like to thank the Frist Center. I think Mark and I moved to Nashville about the same time, and it's been such a great kind of ride. It's really up the ante in town, and of course I grew up in Nashville and have always longed for a place of this caliber and professionalism, and it's quite an honor to be here. I'd like to thank Megan and Richard and Hans for helping with the exhibition, especially Mark. I appreciate the catalog too. Again, it's a real honor to be here. I'm going to start. I think eventually I'll get to the idea of abstraction as allegorical, which is an odd thing because in modernity, it's the very, very thing that Baudelaire and Greenberg were trying to get rid of, right? I mean, they were trying to eradicate literary content and trying to make things that were pure. And it's also very progressive, too, the idea of a utopian, progressive and reductionist thing was something that sort of drove modernity. And I started off as a figure painter, but eventually arrived at abstraction. But I don't see it detached or even separate from figuration. I think it's almost a bizarre separation these days. What painting is not abstract and what painting is not referential in some way, especially when you have ways of looking at the world through telescopes and microscopes and infrared technologies and so on. It's abstract figuration. It's a difficult thing to separate. Anyway, I want to start off with, and Warren and I didn't plan this, with the logos again. This is a recent book that I purchased over the summer on bathos, which is a human attribute that I'm really interested in that I'll get to in just a minute. And it is part of what allegory is thought as Bathic in some ways. But anyway, the law, and I'm in parentheses, logos, logic, reason, geometry, those kinds of ideas, confronts the subject. In other words, like, I'm standing in front of the law and it's judging me. And my painting that I just did is being judged by some kind of law or code. There's a judgment going on there. But on the other hand, and I'm referencing the word allegory there, which means a discourse of the other. Others speak, the loss of self at the acquisition of speech. On the other hand, law can only be reached by an interpretation that at the same time is a transgression. So it's the transgression of the law, transgression of the logos, that finds its way for me in the notion of allegory. So that's kind of where I'm starting from. Let's see if we go to the next one. This is for Bob Mode, and he's sitting right there. And I was hoping he'd show up. So I ought to get Bob up here. This is a Hogarth engraving, which I really love, and it's part of the book that I'm reading, the Bathos. But it's the opposite of the sublime, right? So we think of the art as, and especially modern art, as sort of aspiring towards the transcendental and the sublime. But if you think about relationships between things, the necessary other, we talked about allegory just about what is the necessary other, the sublime? The sublime without bathos is no sublime. It can't define itself without the dialectic other, bathos. And so Hogarth is doing these allegorical engravings, and this is bathos. I'm going to read this bottom part. I don't know if you can see it. I can blow it up at home, but it says the bathos. You can see the allegory going on there too. I thought it was pretty neat. The World's End, the movie came out this week. So it's the tavern that's burning, at the World's End. And of course, the sickle's broken and the clock's run out and the broom's broken and everything's falling apart, basically. The only thing that's sort of stable and erect is the gallows in the background. Now, think about, I'm going to be talking about abstraction in a minute, other than sort of an idealized modernist sense of abstraction. I'm thinking about it almost in Rococo terms, or in the allegorical artists like Hogarth. Anyway, it says the bathos, I ought to make Bob do this, manner of sinking, which is what bathos is like sinking, the thing that's sinking down. It's the bottom as opposed to the top. It's low. It's of the earth. It's gritty. It's sad. It's pathetic. It's so in a manner of sinking in the sublime, they're related, paintings, what does it say? Inscribed in the dealers in dark pictures. So rather than the sort of the noble, elevated terms of a lot of modernist rhetoric, following Kant to say Greenberg and so on, this is kind of a rejection of this. I've got to tell a little Bible story here, and because I'm not gonna go full. I was gonna either play the fool or play the academic, and I'm gonna straddle that a little bit. But I grew up in the church like Warren, and this is kind of a fundamentalist area, and sort of defined who both of us are or were. And so you get these stories, these biblical stories that stay with you. This is one that stuck with me, and I've used this in public once before, so bear with me. And then I'll go through the slides fairly rapidly. There is a story, actually, I went to a Bible study. This is 20 years ago when I used to go to church, and I was a believer. So before I understood bathos. So, anyway, I was in this Bible study, and we were trying to sort of fit in with this Christian community. I was teaching at a Christian college, and it was a fairly intelligent group of people. There were most of them academics, professors, doctors, and so on. And they were studying this verse in Matthew. It was towards the end of the book, and it was sort of end of time story, and Jesus was going to Jerusalem, and he was sort of facing his death, more or less, and he knew it, and he was meeting with his apostles, and they were talking about final things, and all of a sudden this woman comes in, and I call her W.A.J. That's a short version. There's no name for her. People call her Mary Magdalene, but that's not. We don't know who it was. But she's a woman with an alabaster jar, so I say W.A.J. So on all the footnotes in my books, I write W.A.J. So when Derrida's talking about deconstruction, that's W.A.J. So anyway, she comes in, and she's kind of gritty. She's of bathos, if you will. And she lets her hair down, and that you don't do that, right? A woman doesn't interrupt a man's conversation about, especially back in the day. And to uncover her hair was an eroticism, and that was not accepted either. That was full of bathos too. And she's out of control. She's chaotic. She's crying. She's upset. She's realized her low position in the world. And she takes this alabaster jar, and she breaks it open and pours it on Jesus' feet, and takes her hair, and with her tears and this perfume, she washes his feet. Well, that's kind of outrageous, and the apostles got it, right? The apostles said, this is outrageous. This is kind of scandalous. It's a transgression, if you will. And they said, you shouldn't be here. And besides, you could have taken that perfume, which was worth a lot of money, and we could have fed the hungry and helped the homeless and so on. So there's the story. And Jesus stands up and says, and it's the only place I know of in the Bible other than some of the poetry in the Old Testament. And so Jesus says, no, leave her alone. What she has done is a beautiful thing. The idea of beauty. It's the only time that I know that beauty emerges in this text, right? And at the time when I was listed, I said, no wonder I don't fit in this place, because everybody's sitting there. This Bible's going. This is the only time I don't understand Jesus. He's out of character. This doesn't make sense for him to be out of character here. And I luckily kept my mouth shut that time, and didn't. I said, that's kind of why I don't maybe fit in this place so much. I don't understand the nature of the transgression there. And then I began to think about it longer, so I began to see W.A.J. as beauty, as a metaphor for beauty, right? And that ends up distilling what beauty is for me, which is very different than a Platonic sense of beauty. Then I got to thinking, that is what it must be Judaism in its latter days, in its end game, trying to reconcile, come up with an aesthetic that in some way embraces Greek and Roman aesthetics, but do a twist on it. Can you imagine that becoming a representation of this Bathetic situation being a representation of beauty, an allegory of beauty? It wasn't just a fact, a historical fact. It was an allegory for beauty. And there you have what beauty is. And I used to think that W.A.J. was what I should be in terms of what an artist is. She was the artist in the New Testament. And then I began to think, if I take her as a symbol or as an icon, that's what beauty is. If I take her as an allegory, as a fragment of a story that needs the other conditions of the story to make it work, to make it function dialectically, then it becomes not a symbol, but it becomes an allegory. And in this allegory, this is my construction, this isn't theology, but I'm not a theologian, but in my own little world, the allegory is Jesus' logos, right? He is modernism. he is the logos, and the apostles are the apologists. They're the ones that are perpetuating the logos, and W.A.J. is the Bathetic transgressor in the story. And Jesus recognized that transgression, if the allegory holds as allegory, as a necessary condition. The Bathetic is a necessary condition. Now, in Nashville, we have a heck of a lot of apologists. You know, I am of Terry Winters. I am of whoever. We could trace our genealogy and we become apologists. And Jesus intervenes and he says, no, the beautiful thing is the transgressor, the Bathetic character of the y'all won't have to go to church this Sunday, do you? You get your sermon. I was going to be a preacher or an artist or a forest ranger when I was 7 or 8. So I should have been a forest ranger. But anyway, I'm thinking of, so this sounds like a radical stance, like I'm interested in being this sort of bad boy or this radical, this sort of W.A.J., but I'm not, thanks, you want to be my, my guide here. I'm not interested in like a punkish negativity for its own sake. I don't want to be disruptive or decadent for its own sake. But how does she function in this allegory? There is a resistance to the codification or the objectification of beauty. That's how she functions. She will not allow the situation to become objectified, for it to turn into a code, for it to turn into a law. There has to be a resistance there to that. Now, Adorno talks about the reification of things, and that's what art is. Art is a resistance to the reification, meaning to turn a thing into a thing. So if the painting's getting too beautiful, if it's starting to look too much like what's expected within the codes, the current codes, there needs to be this resistance, this transgression, this bathos entering into the formula. So again, Adorno's sense of reification becomes sort of for me connected to W.A.J. And if I were to be truthful, probably the church was more influential to me and who I am than any other thing. But a resistance to fundamentalism is what's at stake here. So a resistance to any fundamentalism, of the reification of a governmental system, like a democracy, a resistance to the reification of an economy that's capitalist, a resistance to the fundamentalism, theological fundamentalism, a resistance to aesthetic fundamentalism, a resistance to modernity. And by the way, I love modernity, but it's a resistance to that which is reifying modernity or notions of modernity that concern me. All right, so there's my speech. And so we'll look at some slides with very little speeches now. But I do want to say this. So, like, when I go into the studio, what are some of the things that I do in the studio that feels sympathetic to WAJ? And it's gotten less and less where I want to make a beautiful painting. I don't want to make an ugly painting. I want to make a beautiful painting. I would like to make a painting that resists the reification of beauty or the reification of goodness and so on, the thingification of those things. So I play more in the studio than I used to when I was sort of making a body of work for the galleries, And I guess one other thing that I should say about WAJ, and one of the things that upset the Apostle so much is that she didn't, and they were upset that the perfume could be sold to help the homeless, was that one of the things that was being resisted there was a resistance to use value and a resistance to exchange value, if you want to use some Marxist terms, but they weren't commodities. That couldn't be commodified, and that's one of the things that sort of upset the apostles and so on. Anyway, so here's some of the things that I try to do to resist reification. Play, and that's an old term, and even Kant talked about the aleatoric, the necessity of the aleatoric in art making. Games, invent games to play, sometimes with other people and sometimes by myself. Decoration, which is an offense. It's the overflow of the perfume and the tears and the long hair. Kitsch, it's not something I want to embrace like, say, Jeff Koons or Warhol, but it is one of the necessary conditions that I look at. The Gothic, which is something Greenberg hated and resisted, the literary content of work, and the Gothic, the excesses of Gothic. And though he was a big supporter of Jackson Pollock, and he was trying to steer Pollock away from the Gothic, and what did Pollock do? He named a painting Gothic. So I'll show you, And anyway, excess, ornamentation, eroticism. WAJ, that was a very erotic thing for her to do, let her hair down and clean a man's feet and with perfume and oil. That's a Dionysian image too, if you want to think about. And I think the writer of the New Testament was well aware that he was appropriating Greek and Roman text and mythology, which is another reason why it's allegorical and rather than historical. But anyway, eroticism and touch become part of that. And resisting exchange or use or exchange value. So those are some things. So we're going to get to see a lot of really crappy things, really little doodly things, and we'll go through these things kind of early. It's the cardboard box with gesso on it, and these little loopy things touching the points of tension along the crevices of the folds of the cardboard box, and painted slightly a glossy orange that's set on the surface. If you look at it closely enough, it's back painted with orange, so it glows orange. You could look at those orange dots as if you're looking through the box at the glowing, so it's connecting the figure-ground relationship there. That's a little game I play. This is in the last 5 or 6 exhibitions I've been in. This has been in the exhibition as sort of an overseer or an angel, if you will. This is a collage. Do dozens or hundreds of collages and keep very few of them. This is one, this kind of light and eroticism and the glossiness of the paper. And then again, the folding becomes part of something that I do often as well. These are kind of older. This is a found magazine cover that's been taped together, and then magic markers used to erase. All the black is magic marker that's erased 90% of the imagery, and you're just left with these cascading ribbony forms. So it's a waterfall or cascading, but it's also this corrugation or folding. Lambert's in the show. We both have been using corrugation as a kind of a metaphor for quite a while. This is a little doodle in the studio. I won't say much about it, except it starts off as an idea where this thing bends and twists like a tumbling ladder. A bunch of them are made. They're thrown on a desk. They sit there for 2 or 3 days, and I put a light on it and photograph it. There are hundreds of these, and I come back to some of them periodically. I really love the way the shadow creates an image stronger than the figure, and that's used in some of the pieces that are in the exhibition. It's tilted in space, so it's both flat and spatial. It's kind of a ploy that Miranda used in terms of spatial construction. I guess I can use this thing. This is a painting that's sort of based on some of those ideas. The paintings aren't directly painted from any of the drawings or sketches, but the idea of flat and spatial areas and cascading and corrugation and all of that happens in there. This is a game that Nick Stoley and Matt Christie and Hugo and I sort of enacted in the studio. A very capricious game. It had no sort of goals or ends. We just came together and crushed cups for an hour. And the cups began to take on characteristics of, ugly ones and pristine ones, and we put a shelf up, and they began to take on the characteristics of characters. And this is when I begin to think about the paintings becoming more like allegorical, in other words, sort of telling stories. It's a detail. I really love this one. I did this one. I took a board and smashed the cup in a perfect pressure, so like those little folds or crevices, which I've been fascinated with since I saw Roger van der Weyden painting when I was 17, and it looks like a van der Weyden detail, but these are some other little pieces of rubber where I put a geometric pattern on. That's, again, sort of a stand-in for rational measured geometry, but then it becomes rubbery and bent and twisted and organic, or eroticized, if you will, like a fishnet stockings on a woman's leg. Sorry, Deborah. No, this is another one. That's rubber. And then the figure-ground relationship starts to become confused and I think kind of playful and funny. This is about a few hundred yards from Watkins. I just drive around there sometimes, and there's apparently a mason. There's 4 or 5 of these, but some of the same conditions that we're looking at in some of the other images. Of course, there's a reference to Jasper Johns, if you know his Harlem Light painting there as well. It's a mailbox. But it's kind of kitschy, but I love it still. This is a flannel board Bible school. I taught Bible school for a while. A flannel board illustration of a cloud. This is a painting of a cloud, more or less, but the same conditions of some of the other stuff we were looking at. These are 18 by 24 paintings, and they're manically wrought. There's 50 layers of paint on there. I'm embarrassed by that. One of these days I'll figure a way to make a painting the way Patrick makes a painting, until then, like there's just all this stuff there. This is a piece that's similar, and I'm showing these together because I hope you see some connections to these things. They're formal connections, but the idea of how the characters are being built in them too. I built a studio last 2 years, spent most of my time doing that rather than making paintings, and this was a sassafras tree that was cut down. I kept it as a memorial. I kept part of a hackberry tree and part of a bodock tree and this part of a sassafras tree. And I'm trying to resurrect it in a way, and so I take this dead thing and interject kitsch in it, 50s anodized aluminum tumblers that are pushed into the space that sort of push light into it and turn the tree into something like, I'm just ran out of time, it looks like a engine. I'll go real quickly. It's painting sort of similar. I won't talk about these. These are long. This is 25 years ago. This is the plate spinners, but again, I'm thinking about these characters that form allegories. This is a 30-foot tree that was hewn called periodic tables, punning that. But and this is a recent play off of that where some of the game's counting, where nature's counting with the little ringlets. And then this is a game that I play where it's a drawing and a drawing and a drawing. I'm going to stop on this one just for a second. This is the original drawing, which is aleatoric scribbles. And then these become drawings of the original drawing. In other words, these two little green squares are redrawn as these larger green squares. And then they're redrawn over here. So this redrawing of the green squares is redrawn as a triangle on this corrugated piece of paper. That's a game I play. This is counting vertically, which forms a cloud. There's a cloud. In other words, the counting is eroticized. This is called, we got the title, Origins of Radical, and I won't tell you the game, but but it's a game I'm playing, and that's what it looks like when the game's finished. This is Dancers on a Plane. This was done the day that Merce Cunningham died. So anyway, I won't go into that either. This is a touching where these yellow poles touch. These yellow poles stay within this frame and touch the border of the frame, and so you're evoking, touching, and it's like, as if my body is touching those things, and then the photograph is touching the rubber at the bottom. Tiger is an image I won't go into. I'm going to go through these quickly, but these are photographs mounted on aluminum with Bondo. And they're more recent paintings. Some of these will be up at Watkins, called Monsters, Prophets, and Sinners. And this is part of my allegory. This is a zombie. It's the same image, but a different state of zombiness. It's another zombie being blown up, I suppose. They're all entitled, by the way, so that they're supposed to evoke abstraction. And I'm changing my color systems, and it's not showing up well in the slide. But I'm using CMYK as a system for color instead of red, yellow, and blue like painters usually do. So zombie autopsy. Anyway. These won't be titled and show y'all are privileged to the way I read these. These are bat images, basically. There were bats that were flying around while I was building the studio. They're beautiful movements and shapes. It's another bat painting, more or less. This is a prophet here. I won't go into that. This ugly, bathetic painting. This is another. You can see the fishnet stockings and the light and so on. And the dimples, fleshiness. It's a fairly new painting, a lot of scraping and glazing. This is the last painting. This is not quite finished. Maybe finished this week. I don't know. I'm a little embarrassed to show this. This is just a snapshot I shot last night, as a matter of fact. So I worked very large for a long time, and so this is the first 7-footer I've done in a while. So this is more like a stage, and so you've got lighting and blocking. So it's CMYK and blocking and lighting. So it's a stage for the characters to enact on, very loosely, of course. And then there's another painting in this series, and these are the works in the show that you can go look at, but you can see where the images are coming from and how they're being stacked and how they interact and how they function out, I think, allegorically. I'll go through these really quickly because you can look at them outside if you want to. But these are more sketches than anything, but I like them nonetheless, and I appreciate Mark's eye for them. But they're roller coasters that have been turned up on end and overlap, diagrammatic roller coasters and real roller coasters interacting with images other ways. There's the table. It's a found object, just a flyer that you can see through. And this is a book that I'm working on with Britt Stadig, if y'all know about those projects. But these are 6 double-page spreads, so 12 pages. There's probably going to be 3 more pages, so it'll be 9 double-page spreads. This is the first layer, and there'll be at least 2 more layers on top of each one of these pages, and they'll be folded too. And I don't quite know how they'll be presented yet, but that's how those pieces in the hallway are coming into these book forms. So that's it.